This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Headscarves and Good Yarns with me, Amal Abdullahi. The show is all about talking about race, diversity and everything in between, all in the hopes of empowering a more empathetic Aotearoa. We talk about all these huge life things through the lens of people's lives and stories. I hope every yarn you take a wee gem from it and expands your heart and mind just a wee bit more.
Kia ora, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. By the time that this comes out, it will be Easter Monday, so I hope that everyone is having a beautiful long weekend, enjoying it however you want to please, because we've got 4 days off in a row. How beautiful is that? I love it when we have time back to ourselves. And this episode, I really want to talk about what does it mean to live in your values. And I think this has been heavy on my mind for a long time. But I feel like the impetus or like the reason or the urge to think and talk about this, it just keeps on getting stronger day by day as, I don't know, because every single time I just open the news, I'm like, what is literally happening in this world? And it just makes me feel all the things. And I love, last episode we were talking about systems thinking, and I think a huge part of our impact in this world is going to come from, transformative, radical, systemic change. But I think where do the seeds of that change lie? And that's with us. That's with us as the individual. That's with us as community. And that starts with grassroots. And I think learning and thinking and practicing how to live in a way that reflects my values and reflects the world that I want to see in the future, the type of world that I'm like everyone can participate and everyone can be thriving and no one is dehumanized. I'm like, I want to take steps towards that kind of future. What that specifically looks like, girl, I don't know. I don't hold all of the answers. I feel like the answers lie within all of us if we all come together collectively. But I want to take steps towards that. And so how do we do that? And how do we catalyze how we feel about this world and catalyze that into action? And I think another thing that I've really been thinking about is, what does it look like, or what does it mean to be accountable to our own moral code? And I think why this question has been coming up, particularly as of late for me, is the fact that I am looking at the world and noticing the news and just noticing what's happening around me. There are a lot of things, and this is my 2 cents as well. You may disagree or you may agree with me, who knows? But there are a lot of things that happen and are enabled in our system, whether it's language used in media, whether it's framing of how things are happening, whether it's corporations cashing in, but then you kind of ask yourself, what is the true cost of where that money is coming from? But there are things that these things are happening, and it definitely makes me go, we cannot allow the system to dictate what our morals are, because these systems are kind of the reason why these systems thrive is because it always kind of comes at the cost of somebody, depending on the situation, it could change who, but it always comes at a cost of somebody or a community paying that price. And so if that is the case, then we cannot allow the systems to kind of, or the media is part of the systems to help us be accountable to the moral code. Like, we have to be accountable to our own moral code. So, part of that is knowing what your values are and what your morals are and where your priorities lie. And once you've realized that, so how do I hold myself accountable to that? And this is something that I have been asking myself, and it's crazy. I mean, and I need to put this disclaimer out there. I am not perfect, y'all. I'm not a perfect human. But I'm trying my best. And whether it's a small step, whether they're seemingly insignificant changes, I always need to keep asking myself that question, like, how am I today being accountable to my own moral code? And I think that's a huge question to ask yourself. And I think if we all asked ourselves that, we'd all be pretty surprised by maybe how different this world would look like. Because, there are so many not so cool things that happen that just make me go, I don't know what questionable moral code, this world has been established on, but I think it really does start with us. And I've kind of mentioned this on previous episodes, but the way that our system is set up, it's very easy for our emotions to be socialized. And when that has happened, it's very hard to really live in your value. And if you're listening and you're like, Amma, could you break that down a little bit more? I mean, if you just think about the stereotypes and the unfair and untruthful rhetorics that are really enabled and are able to breed, for lack of a better word, about certain communities, all of those kind of false narratives about certain communities, they're built on fear. And, the purpose of it is to create further divide. Like, for example, I can only comfortably speak about rhetorics that I have experienced in my own life. I think I can only ever speak for my own experience. And even then, I'm not going to be out here saying that I speak for everyone in the community, because, listen, we all got different experiences out here. We're not all the same. But I think it's important to talk about it. So one thing that I have noticed in my life is the rhetoric, or that false narrative around migrants, and being someone who visibly kind of looks different, then has, in my life has made me a visible target, or I've very much been on the receiving end of this false narrative of, migrants coming here, and just stealing people's jobs, stealing the Kiwi way of living. It's kind of insane when you think about it. And another thing about this narrative, this false narrative as well, is that it only seems to pertain to POC migrants. So, POC, people of colour, POC migrants. I never really, when it comes to, and I'm not trying to invalidate other migrants that aren't POC, but in my experience, I have not noticed or observed this rhetoric around migrants when it comes to non-POC migrants. And, you know, this rhetoric is very much built on this fear that has become socialized into it. Yeah, it's been socialized and now feeding this like narrative. And I don't want to oversimplify things. There are other things going on behind the fear. A bit of scapegoatness happening there as well. But you see how human emotions have kind of been socialized and manipulated, that has then allowed this rhetoric to just kind of take off without any kind of roadblocks. And if you think back to times in history where there has been, honestly, you don't even need to look, when I say history, you don't even need to look far back at all, because it's still happening to this present day. But I think thinking about it historically, where this is just some events where some time has passed, and I think collectively we can all look back on that and be like, ooh, that actually wasn't all good, eh? You can see how the rhetoric of fear has taken over and how human emotions have been socialized and manipulated. And so when you're in that very vulnerable state, these untrue rhetorics can kind of take off. And I think when I think about the current state of the world and how there is this huge widening river between left and right, and it just seems like we're living in a world where we can't actually have conversations. It seems like there's a bit of that happening too, where people's emotions, I mean, again, that is complicated and there are other things going on, but I think an element of that is that people's emotions have been socialized, and when people are in a vulnerable position like that, then it's really easy for stories around certain political positions, around certain communities can just take off, and there's no attempt to understand. There's zero attempt to have a conversation about things. There's just none of that happening. And I think an element of that is emotions being socialized. And I think if we were able to hold space for our own values, for our recognizing our own emotions, it's a relationship that goes hand in hand. The more you're able to do that for yourself, the more that you're able to do that for other people. For example, one thing that I have noticed, and just in my own personal experience with people who I really thought that we would have zero common ground, if I am in the headspace to really listen and to have that conversation, and when I say if I'm in that headspace, because I think when I first started this podcast, I was like all gung-ho. If you didn't agree with me, let me just hit you with the information, the facts, and not really listen. I would just be like, this is the information, this is the facts, how you're thinking is wrong, period, mic drop, ow. Like, I literally used to be like that. So when I say if I'm in the headspace, that's what I'm meaning. And as I've grown older, I've realized that things are just not productive like that. But when I've gone into conversations with people that I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know how much we really think eye to eye here. It's interesting once, I've lived with curiosity and empathy. it's interesting realizing, where those worldviews come from. And this has happened so many times to me, where I've had these conversations and realized that, underlying those worldviews is actually not different values, but, again, I can't oversimplify things, but I think an element of that is, emotions being socialized and then just being swept away with all of these false narratives and rhetorics around certain communities, around certain events, and when that happens, it's crazy how much it can program the way people think about things. And so when I've had these conversations, it's been really interesting for both of us to kind of realize, actually, we're quite aligned in values, but how has that led to different world views? And I think when we've had the chance to really unknot where these false narratives are coming from, it's really crazy how much we're actually in alignment. And so that's why I think it's really important to understand what it means to live in your values. I think definitely start with yourself, because the more that you're able to do that level of deep thinking for yourself, then you're able to hold that space for other people. I think if we were able to do more of that in the world, I think the world would honestly look like a wildly different place. I've been talking a lot about fear in this episode today, and I think fear, as I've said, it's just a very vulnerable position to be in, because when fear is at the root cause of things, it breeds what's the word I'm trying to look for? It breeds divide. It breeds putting communities and people in silos. It puts communities in our society in a position where we start to separate each other. And I think, it's a basic human urge. When you are scared, then there's that instinct to protect and to double down. But I think, as I've been saying, when that fear is socialized, when you're protecting, you then get into this weird headspace of them versus us. And when you get into that headspace of them versus us, and that sense of othering, well, we're focused, and couple that with the individualistic. I definitely said that wrong, but I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure where I went wrong there. So we're just going to run with it, y'all. Couple that with the individual motivated world that our capitalistic society kind of prioritizes. You get into a funky headspace of you can understand and see why those untrue rhetorics, those stereotypes can just run amok. It is absolutely insane saying that out loud, but you have to understand that this happens on such a deep level. It's really built into our subconscious, and it's supported by the world that we're living in the moment. Even if you look at our major media platforms, the double standards that exist, the language that is used towards certain communities, and this is completely normalized as well, that you can see how it is continually supported. And not only is it enabled and supported, there's a lack of opportunity to really challenge that way of thinking as well. And I think if there's a lack of opportunity to be like, whoa, let's really think about this. Like, there aren't many there aren't any roadblocks in the way that our systems are set up. And so when there's zero roadblocks, like, you really have to put in the work to unpack things. And if you're especially, and I think that's even harder if you're in a position where you do have that privilege, because, you know, I need to put that disclaimer out there. I feel like every single time I talk about privilege, I really need to put this disclaimer out there. Again, I'm not saying that life is smooth sailing, but, you know, with having privilege, there are certain things that are just in your blind spot. I think that's what it is. It's not to say that because you have privilege, you know, automatically life is like, you know, fine and dandy, and you'll never go through any trials or tribulations, or you'll never need any support or help. That's really not what I'm trying to say at all. But all I'm saying is that the comfort that privilege provides is that it puts you in a certain position where you're unable to see some things because it's just in your blind spot. Like, you know, you can think of privilege where you're kind of sitting in a cushy pillow, and because you're sitting in that cushy position, there are just some things from that height that you're not going to be able to see because it's literally in your blind spot. And so you do have to, you know, if we really want to run with the car metaphor, you're going to have to look over your shoulder. You're really going to have to, like, put in the work. You know, a cheeky look to your side mirror ain't going to do it. Like, you're going to have to physically turn around and look. And you're going to have to think about things and really go out of your way to, like, reprogram what our system kind of puts forward as the norm. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of work. And I think it's a lifelong thing, doing that work. And again, I just want to reiterate that just because things, you know, certain things are in your blind spot because of your privilege, it doesn't mean that you can't have a tough life. I really want to put that out there. And I also want to put it out there that within our same lived experience, there are certain contexts where we do have the privilege and certain contexts where we don't. So that is also a nuanced thing as well. But I just want to say that, you know, not so great things breed under fear. And I think when I think about the world and the state that it's in and all of these things that are happening, there is a lot of fear. Like, there's a lot of fear around the current cost of living crisis. I feel like we've been in a cost of living crisis for so long now. I'm not economically inclined naturally. And so, listen, if anyone wants to come onto the podcast, just side note, and they want to talk things economy, I would love that because I'm not really understanding it like that. But anyways, we're on a tangent. This ongoing cost of living crisis that seems to have no predicted end coming is generating a lot of valid fear. But I'm sure that there will be research to back me up on this, but when there's fear, when there's that sense of insecurity, people are in vulnerable positions, and scapegoats come through, narratives that aren't true come through even more. Just in my own personal sphere, I know it's really hard for everyone to be finding jobs at the moment, but in the past couple of years, I've definitely seen stories about, recruitment agencies and HR people immediately striking off POC names. And there's one that in particular that comes to mind. I remember reading it maybe a year ago, so I can't quite remember what the company was, but somehow it got leaked, and there was this lady from HR, or was a lady or a man, but I feel like it was a lady, but anyways, it's irrelevant. Someone from HR was talking about how they just immediately discard or shred applications from people who have foreign sounding names because they need to protect New Zealanders and make sure New Zealanders have the job, especially in this economy. And when I remember reading that, and I was so shocked, but then also once the initial what the heck subsided, I was this is actually not surprising at all, because there is a lot of valid fear and concerns around this cost of living crisis. And as I said, when there's fear, people want to double down and look after their own, and it's very easy in this vulnerable position for false narratives to just run wild. It's like the fear is a breeding, the environment for these things to just be speed run without any hold ons. It's just fully accepted. And when I think about that, I'm just actually, it's not surprising at all that this happened. And I think with things happening around the world now, I mean, there's lots of emotions going on, but I think fear is a big one. And it's very easy to see how the divide among communities and among different, political view groups, or the divide between family, friends, it just seems like there's a divide everywhere, and at every level and layer and perspective at the moment. And I think if we want to live in a better, changed world, one thing that we're really going to have to learn how to deal with is that fear, because it's not going to go away. And I think we need to galvanize and come together in community more, where that fear can no longer be manipulated or socialized. But I think a huge part of learning how to navigate that fear is learning how to live in our value. And I think when I think about the antidote to that fear, I'm thinking community care, I'm thinking solidarity, I'm thinking collective action, and working among our differences. I think the antidote to that fear is there, but it's not easy to kind of practice that antidote in our current system. And so that's why I really wanted to make this episode about, how to really live in our values and to understand why we need to do that. because we need to be held accountable to our own moral code and not that be dictated by the world that we're living in, the systems that we're living in. We need to learn how to live in our own values and take action so that our emotions aren't socialized. We need to learn to live in our values because community and grassroots is so important, is so important. But I feel like it's hard to do that if you don't have a true understanding of who you are and how you want to move in this world and how you want to show up for the values and priorities that are really, really important to you. And I think one really big thing to what it means to live in your values is, well, just understand what they are to begin with, and to understand your values to the point where it's so important to you. It's a guiding principle. Because when it comes to values, there will be so many things that you're like, oh, I do really care about this. This is important to me. But what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, living in your values or understanding your values is that values that are so important to you, it comes above anything else. It really is a guiding principle, and it's so important to you that you will pay the price, or you'll pay that the cost of living in that value. For example, for me, family is so important to me, and I will do anything for my family. I will. It's an important priority to me. Like, I will work my life around family. It's that important to me. Another important value to me is, it's a very broad value, but just the value of justice. And this can show up specifically in many ways in my life, but right now in particular, how that value of justice is really showing up is through money. And every single time I'm spending money or making big purchases, it's really thinking about where is this money going? What impact will it have on this world? When I'm thinking about purchases. And again, I'm not saying that I am picture perfect in making those decisions, but I'm trying to make that a priority, especially as I'm getting older, and as I'm like, if I contrast this to 10 years ago, I felt like I was just like a baby, a young adult, and I didn't really have a lot of money, so I didn't really have the privilege of thinking about money in the same way that I'm thinking about it now. Granted, it's not like I'm making bang right now. I did make the decision to go back to uni, so I'm still a student, but I think, I don't know what I'm meaning when I say proper adult, but let's just say some time has passed. You could probably remove the young from the young adult and just leave adult. So the way that I'm thinking about money is different these days. And so there's something that is becoming important to me. And so it's really trying to understand what values are so important to you that it guides you. It really guides your life on every level, whether it's day to day, for the big things in life, it's something that really, really guides you. And it's a really hard practice, I think, to actually realize that. And that's something that you don't always have to do alone. That's something that being in community can help you realize. And I think that's the next thing that I want to talk about. I think the antidote to this fear, but also a big part of living in our values and learning how to do things differently, is community care. And there was this particular point that came through, and it may seem like it doesn't relate to what this, the podcast episode today, but please stay with me. We'll get there. So the Instagram page is called Brown Girl Therapy. It is it's a very cool page. It's like unpacking. It's like a therapist who owns the page, and it's like unpacking counseling and therapy and mental health and well-being, but from the lens or the point of view of someone who identifies as a person of color, or just coming from an ethnic person's POV. And not to say that if you are not an ethnic person that it won't be relevant. I think the page just has some really enlightening things for everyone, regardless. So I definitely would recommend. But I was on Instagram the other day, and the page had made this really interesting point about how sometimes telling people to go to therapy isn't the answer or isn't the best thing to do. And the reason why they made this point is we're living in a world where people are not unwell per se, but the system is not well. And the system, the world that we're living in it doesn't make space for everyone to thrive and for all communities to thrive. And so it's not the emphasis on the individual being, unwell. It's more people are responding to living in a system like that. And, there was a point made about how therapy, in this particular instance, it's not for all instances, but in this specific instance, therapy is helpful in the sense that it can provide regulation techniques or self-soothing techniques to ground yourself and to ground your body. But you can't self-care your way out of the injustices that our systems are creating. And that actually there's a lot of power and there's a lot of healing in being able to air out those frustrations and to find relief from those emotions in community, like talking to your neighbor, talking to your family, talking to your friends, going to hang out in third spaces and, connecting with like-minded people. But we're I feel like in our modern world, and I have read research that has backed this up as well, but we are living in a world where it is very easy to live in a more isolated fashion, and it's a lot harder for community to come together. Like the other day, not even the other day, it was a wee while ago, but it's still stuck with me now. Someone made this TikTok about how we even in the most little, this is just such a small example, but I think it's a small example that kind of captures a big thing that's happening where, you know, and when it comes to getting dropped off or picked up from the airport, Uber is the way that most people tend to go, rather than asking if a family member or a friend is free to do that pick up or that drop off. And it's like we are, you know, living in a world where we're paying for things where community just used to come through. And you know, again, I need to put that disclaimer out there that, you know, I understand Ubers are helpful. There are some times where literally no one can pick you up or drop you off, and so you have to Uber. And that is the way, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's that mindset of like, oh, I'd rather Uber than inconvenience. And, you know, to get to that mindset, I think the practice of community has changed, or maybe we've forgotten on the way with how the world that we're living in, it's convenient and it's easy to pay for things. And I think going back to the point that the Brown Girl Therapy had made, was that sometimes, you know, you're not going to need therapy. You're just responding to the system, or you're responding to the world that we're living in. And in times like that, community is what we really need. And, you know, I was reading that point and I was like, like, community is so important and it's so uplifting, but I don't know how many of us are really getting that community. And I think it's daunting, right? Especially with a lack of third spaces. But, you know, there are people out there and there is community out there. And if there's something that you care about, you know, the chances are very high that there is a community kind of built around that already. And don't be afraid to cultivate community. And even if you already have an established community, you know, family, I'm meaning family, friends, how can we care for each other more? What does that look like? And I don't want to provide answers or solutions, because that is going to be so specific and niche to your own life. Like, there's no one blanket solution for that. And I think what that looks like for you will come with exploration. But even with our established communities and communities we want to build up, what does that, how can we care for each other more? What will that look like? And let's not think about what that will look like from the perspective of not wanting to inconvenience, because I think that attitude is holding us back from engaging with community. What does that look like? I think, yeah, that point from Brown Girl Therapy was really, really interesting. And speaking of community, there was a quote that I found while I was doing research for this episode from the Queen Bell Hooks. I think if the number of times that I refer to bell hooks on headscarves and yarns, if I got paid, girl, my student loan would have been paid. I love bell hooks so much. Like, bell hooks, an amazing person. Like, just the way that they looked at the world. Chef's kiss. But anyways, I found this quote. And I think it speaks perfectly to what I've been saying in the episode so far about community care and about fear and about our emotions being socialized. So buckle in, because this one is a doozy. So, dominator culture has tried to keep us all afraid, to make us choose safety instead of risk, sameness instead of diversity. Moving through that fear, finding out what connects us, reveling in our differences. This is the process that brings us closer, that gives us a world of shared values, of meaningful community. I read that and I'm like, yes, Belle, that is exactly, like, literally this whole podcast episode has just been distilled into that quote. I think that's amazing. Because let me just reread that again, but break it down. So dominator culture has tried to keep us all afraid, to make us choose safety over risk. And I think this is what I'm saying when I'm saying that our emotions can be socialized and it's kind of manipulated by the system. And when we're choosing safety instead of risk, that is when you get into that headspace, you're now this system as it is perceived as safe. Anything that rocks the boat is considered a risk. When things are considered, when it's safety versus risk, you can see how in that mindset, negative stereotypes and false narratives can just happily grow and run wild. So there's that. There's the sameness instead of diversity. I think it's that same mindset that safety versus risk kind of promotes. Okay, the next part of the quote. Moving through that fear, finding out what connects us, reveling in our differences. And I think this is where the community care comes from. And I think when we have built that sense of community, then we get to that last part of the quote, which is a world of shared values, of meaningful community. And I think when we get to that stage where we have shared values and meaningful community, boy, I don't know what kind of world we're going to live in, but I just already know it's going to be a good one for us all. And I think that's really important to talk about. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about in this episode is, I think, another way where we can practice or be a catalyst for change is learning how to work or understand or talk with those who have different opinions to us. And it's crazy how, you can't dehumanize these people, because most likely these people are going to be your family and your friends. And so if we're able to work through our differences to get to that meaningful community, starting with our family and with our friends, I think that will create such a big difference, and I again want to finish with a quote, again from the Queen, Bell Hooks. For me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? And I think that's what's happening now with this divide that is happening. We have this binary is getting stronger and stronger. And I think it's because we have kind of dehumanized the quote-unquote other side. And so when that happens, there's no room to have conversations. There's no room to have difficult conversations because, essentially you don't believe that there is an ability for transformation to happen. And so I think for change to happen and to be a catalyst of change, our ability to forgive and to be compassionate needs to be strengthened. Our ability to humanize everyone, no matter what, needs to be strengthened. Our ability to have difficult conversations needs to be strengthened, because, saying this is easier said than done. It is really, really hard. And this is coming from me. Not that I have any authority, but I'm just saying on a human level, I see you, because I'm trying to do this for myself, and it's really not easy. But it's got to be done, I think, if we really want to be a catalyst for a different world. And on that note, I will wrap up this episode. Thank you for tuning into another episode, and I hope everyone has had a beautiful, beautiful long weekend.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.